We've been together for almost 3 years now. When I look back at how it all started, I remember that rush of excitement, the butterflies, the hope that this time it would be different. He was funny, attentive, and for a while, it felt like nothing could go wrong. We talked for hours, shared our dreams, and made plans about the future, a future that seemed so bright and easy to imagine. At first, everything was new and thrilling. The way he looked at me, the small surprises, the endless conversations that stretched late into the night. I told myself this was what real love felt like, effortless and full of warmth. I thought that if we could keep this feeling alive, nothing could break us. But even in those early days, there were moments I brushed off, little things that didn't quite fit the picture. Sometimes he was distant, his phone always close, or he got annoyed if I asked too many questions. I told myself it was just stress from work, or maybe he was shy about opening up. I wanted to believe the best, because it felt good to believe that love could fix everything. The first few months were full of promises and plans. We talked about moving in together, traveling, maybe someday even getting married. I was sure he was the person I wanted to build a life with. My friends said I was lucky, and I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that this was real. But the truth is, even then, I felt a small knot in my stomach sometimes. When he canceled plans last minute, or didn't reply for hours, I started to feel unsure. I told myself not to overthink, that it was normal for people to have busy lives. But inside, I was already starting to worry. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for his message, checking my phone over and over. I tried to hide it, to act cool and indifferent, but the disappointment was real. It wasn't just about the messages. It was the feeling that maybe I wasn't as important as I thought. Maybe he had other things on his mind. When we were together, things seemed better. We laughed, shared meals, and sometimes just sat quietly watching a movie. Those moments felt like a safe place, a pause from the outside world. But even then, I noticed the silence sometimes stretched too long, or that he seemed distracted. I remember one night, lying awake beside him, feeling completely alone in the same bed. He was already asleep, but I couldn't stop thinking, was he really here with me? Did he feel the same way? Those thoughts scared me, but I didn't say anything. I was afraid to ruin the peace. Looking back, I realized that those early signs were warnings I didn't want to hear. I wanted to believe love would be enough to fix the cracks before they grew bigger. But love isn't always perfect. Sometimes it's messy, confusing, and painful. Still, in those first years, I held on to hope. Hope that we could grow together, learn to understand each other better, and build something lasting. But deep down, I knew that hope was fragile, and the real challenge was just beginning. After about a year together, things started to feel different. The excitement faded, and the reality of everyday life settled in like a weight I hadn't expected. The little things I once ignored became harder to overlook. His silences grew longer, and I found myself walking on eggshells, unsure of what would set him off or make him withdraw completely. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress from work or personal problems he didn't want to share. But the truth was harder to face. He became more closed off, and the connection we had felt like it was slipping away. I tried to reach him, to break through the wall, but often I was met with indifference or irritation. We started arguing more frequently, over small things that didn't matter but exploded anyway. Like the time I asked if he was going to be late, and he snapped at me for nagging. Or when I mentioned plans with friends, and he suddenly became distant and cold. It felt like the more I tried to understand him, the more he pushed me away. One evening, after a particularly tense day, I asked him if something was wrong. Instead of talking, he just shrugged and said, "I'm fine." But I knew he wasn't. That "I'm fine" became the phrase I hated most, because it always meant the opposite. That something was very wrong, but he didn't want to or couldn't explain it. I started feeling like I was losing him. The man I had fallen in love with seemed buried under layers of silence and frustration. And with every argument, every silence, a part of me broke a little more. There were moments of tenderness, of course. Sometimes he would hold me close and say sorry. Those moments gave me hope that maybe we could fix this, that beneath the tension and pain, there was still love. But those moments became fewer and farther between. I also noticed myself changing. I became more anxious, constantly second-guessing my words and actions. I wanted to say the right things, to keep the peace, but it felt like walking a tightrope. I was afraid of pushing him further away, but also afraid of losing myself trying to hold everything together. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining it all. Maybe I was just too sensitive or expecting too much. But the feelings of loneliness and doubt were real, and they didn't go away. It was a confusing time, full of mixed emotions. I loved him deeply but felt more alone than ever. I wanted to believe things would get better, but I was also terrified they might never. One night, after a long silence, I finally asked him why he was pulling away. His answer was quiet and broken. "I don't know who I am anymore." That hit me harder than anything else, not because he didn't have the answer, but because it showed how lost we both were. At that moment, I realized we were at a crossroads. We could keep going like this, drifting further apart. Or we could try to face the pain and figure out what we really wanted. But I wasn't sure if we had the strength to do it. The cracks were no longer small. They were visible and growing, and the person I loved was becoming a stranger I didn't recognize. The weeks that followed felt like living with a roommate instead of a partner. We still shared the same bed, ate at the same table, and exchanged polite conversations about groceries or bills, but it all felt hollow. The warmth that used to live in our apartment had been replaced with a constant, heavy quiet. I tried different approaches. Sometimes I gave him space, hoping he would come to me when he was ready. Other times, I attempted to pull him closer, planning date nights or cooking his favorite meals. But nothing seemed to make a difference. If anything, my efforts only highlighted how far apart we had drifted. He started spending more evenings out. Sometimes he said he was with friends. Other times he claimed he just needed to clear his head. I didn't want to be the kind of partner who demanded explanations for everything, but the lack of transparency gnawed at me. I caught myself checking his social media more often, wondering who he was talking to or where he really was. It wasn't about control. It was about trying to understand the person I felt I was losing. One Saturday night, he came home late. The clock read 2:13 a.m., and I was sitting on the couch in my hoodie, pretending to watch TV. I asked if everything was okay. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "I told you I was out. Why do you always have to make it a big deal?" That cut deep. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I just wanted to feel like I mattered enough for him to want to talk to me. After that night, something in me shifted. I stopped trying so hard. I didn't ask as many questions, didn't plan surprises, didn't push for conversations. Part of me hoped that maybe if I stepped back, he would notice my absence and come toward me again, but mostly, I was just tired. Our intimacy faded too. We still kissed goodbye in the mornings, but it felt like a habit, not a connection. In bed, we lay on opposite sides, scrolling through our phones until we fell asleep. There was no fight, no dramatic break, just a slow, quiet unraveling. One rainy evening, I stood by the kitchen window, watching drops race down the glass. He walked in, poured himself a drink, and didn't even look at me. I realized I didn't remember the last time we had laughed together. I didn't remember the last time I felt safe enough to tell him how I really felt, without worrying he would shut down. I began to think about the woman I was before we met, the one who laughed loudly, made spontaneous plans, and didn't constantly monitor her words. I missed her. I missed me. And yet, despite the growing distance, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. There was still love, or at least the memory of it, and I clung to that like a lifeline. I kept hoping for some sign, that he still wanted us as much as I did. But hope can be dangerous. It can keep you waiting for something that may never come. And deep down, I feared that was exactly what I was doing, waiting for a version of him that no longer existed. The days blurred into a routine of quiet coexistence. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a space, polite, careful, almost mechanical. I found myself memorizing the sound of his footsteps, the way his keys rattled when he came home, searching for any sign of what kind of mood he might be in. Sometimes there were flickers of the man I fell in love with. A small smile when I told a joke, the way his hand would linger on mine for just a moment before letting go. Those moments were rare, but they kept me from walking away. They made me believe, if only for a heartbeat, that maybe we could still find our way back. But the silence between us kept stretching. Conversations were short, safe, and stripped of emotion. I missed the late-night talks, the random laughter, the way he used to look at me like I was his favorite part of the day. Now, his eyes often drifted past me, like he was somewhere else entirely. One evening, I suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us. I thought maybe a change of scenery could help us remember why we chose each other in the first place. He hesitated, then agreed, but his tone was flat, almost like he was doing me a favor. That night, lying in bed, I wondered if he even wanted to be saved. The trip was fine. We walked by the ocean, shared a meal, even laughed a couple of times, but it felt like putting a bandage over a wound that ran too deep. The connection was still fragile, and the weight of everything unspoken followed us like a shadow. I kept telling myself love was worth fighting for, but I also knew love couldn't survive on memories alone. And as much as I tried to hold on, I could feel the threads slipping through my fingers. The morning light felt colder than usual as I sat by the window, nursing a cup of coffee I barely tasted. The apartment was too quiet, the air heavy with unspoken words and unfinished feelings. I watched the city wake up, but inside me, everything was closing down. That weekend trip had been a fragile attempt to patch the cracks, but now, a week later, the silence between us was louder than ever. He barely looked at me, and when he did, it was like I was a stranger, trying to reach him through a fog. I wondered how long we could keep pretending that things were okay. One evening, after dinner, I finally gathered the courage to speak. I needed to know, were we just existing together, or was there still a chance for us to rebuild what was broken? "I don't want us to end like this," I said, my voice trembling, "but I can't keep feeling so alone when we're supposed to be a team." He didn't answer at first. His fingers traced patterns on the table, avoiding my gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but steady. "I don't know if I'm the same person you fell in love with. I don't even know who I am anymore." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had heard them before, but now they carried a finality that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about us, it was about him, about the man he was struggling to find within himself. I reached out, taking his hand in mine. Maybe we need help. Maybe we both do, but I don't want to give up on us without trying. For a moment I thought he might agree, that we could fight through this storm together. But then he pulled his hand away gently, like he was letting go of more than just my touch. "I'm tired," he said softly, "tired of pretending. Maybe it's better if we take some space, figure out who we are on our own." I felt my heart splinter. Space, a break, words I never thought I'd hear from him. But beneath the pain, a small voice inside me whispered that maybe he was right, maybe we had lost ourselves in each other, and only apart could we find the pieces again. The days that followed were the hardest I had ever faced. The apartment felt emptier than ever. His absence was a weight pressing down on me, but it was also a strange relief. No more guessing games, no more walking on eggshells. I threw myself into my own world, work, friends, books, trying to hold myself together. But late at night, when the world was quiet, the loneliness hit me full force. I missed him, in ways I didn't want to admit. Not just the man I loved, but the best friend, the partner, the person who once made me feel safe. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under the door. His handwriting, shaky but deliberate. "I don't have all the answers right now. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope someday we can find our way back, whether as friends or something more. But for now, I need to find myself. Thank you for loving me, even when it was hard." Tears blurred my vision as I read those words. They were full of hope and heartbreak all at once. Hope that maybe, someday, there could be a new beginning. Heartbreak that that beginning wasn't going to happen right now. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket. I didn't know what the future held for us. Maybe we were done. Maybe this was the end of the story we had started together. But I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes love means knowing when to hold on, and sometimes it means knowing when to let go. The days blurred into one another, and the space between us seemed to stretch wider with every passing moment. The silence that once felt like a calm after the storm had turned into a deafening barrier neither of us knew how to cross. I caught myself waiting for him to speak first, to open the door, but the door stayed shut. Each unanswered question, each avoided conversation felt like a tiny fracture growing under pressure. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the floor of our living room, overwhelmed by the heaviness of everything unsaid. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me with memories of how things used to be, laughter echoing, casual touches, shared dreams. But now, those memories felt like echoes from another life. I realized I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The effort to keep us afloat was mine alone, and I was running on empty. Yet, when I tried to express how lost I felt, he recoiled, accusing me of being too much or overthinking. The hurt from those words stung deeper than any argument. One night, after weeks of barely speaking, I finally gathered the courage to confront the silence head-on. I asked him directly if he still wanted to be with me. His answer was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I don't know." It wasn't just a response, it was a confession. Neither of us had a clear answer anymore. That moment became a breaking point, not because it was the end, but because it stripped away the pretense. We both acknowledged the uncertainty, the fear, the confusion. For the first time in months, we talked, really talked, about what we were feeling, what we feared, and what we wanted or didn't want from each other. It was messy. There were tears, raised voices, and moments where I thought we might just walk away for good. But amidst the chaos, there was honesty. A raw, painful truth that maybe love alone wasn't enough to hold us together. We agreed to try couples therapy, not because we had all the answers, but because we were willing to fight for a chance. It was terrifying to expose ourselves like that, to let a stranger see our cracks and vulnerabilities. But somehow, it felt like the only way forward. Therapy sessions were a roller coaster. Some days felt hopeful, like we were finally understanding each other again. Other days brought up more pain, old wounds reopening, and moments of doubt creeping back in. Yet slowly, the walls between us started to crumble, replaced by cautious openness. I realized that healing wouldn't be quick or easy. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But with every small breakthrough, I saw a glimpse of the man I once loved, not perfect, but willing to try. I also had to confront my own fears and insecurities, to stop walking on eggshells and start being honest about my needs and feelings. It wasn't about blame anymore, it was about rebuilding trust and connection. One evening, after a particularly honest conversation, he reached out and took my hand. No words were needed. The touch said everything. It was fragile, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But I knew the road ahead would still be long and uncertain. The cracks in our relationship were deep, and some might never fully heal. Yet, we had chosen to fight, to be vulnerable, and to face the unknown together. And in that choice, I found a new kind of love. Not the easy, fiery passion of before, but a quiet, determined commitment to try, no matter the outcome. The days blurred into one another, and the space between us seemed to stretch wider with every passing moment. The silence that once felt like a calm after the storm had turned into a deafening barrier neither of us knew how to cross. I caught myself waiting for him to speak first, to open the door, but the door stayed shut. Each unanswered question, each avoided conversation felt like a tiny fracture growing under pressure. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the floor of our living room, overwhelmed by the heaviness of everything unsaid. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me with memories of how things used to be, laughter echoing, casual touches, shared dreams. But now, those memories felt like echoes from another life. I realized I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The effort to keep us afloat was mine alone, and I was running on empty. Yet, when I tried to express how lost I felt, he recoiled, accusing me of being too much or overthinking. The hurt from those words stung deeper than any argument. One night, after weeks of barely speaking, I finally gathered the courage to confront the silence head-on. I asked him directly if he still wanted to be with me. His answer was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I don't know." It wasn't just a response, it was a confession. Neither of us had a clear answer anymore. That moment became a breaking point, not because it was the end, but because it stripped away the pretense. We both acknowledged the uncertainty, the fear, the confusion. For the first time in months, we talked, really talked, about what we were feeling, what we feared, and what we wanted or didn't want from each other. It was messy. There were tears, raised voices, and moments where I thought we might just walk away for good. But amidst the chaos, there was honesty. A raw, painful truth that maybe love alone wasn't enough to hold us together. We agreed to try couples therapy, not because we had all the answers, but because we were willing to fight for a chance. It was terrifying to expose ourselves like that, to let a stranger see our cracks and vulnerabilities. But somehow, it felt like the only way forward. Therapy sessions were a roller coaster. Some days felt hopeful, like we were finally understanding each other again. Other days brought up more pain, old wounds reopening, and moments of doubt creeping back in. Yet slowly, the walls between us started to crumble, replaced by cautious openness. I realized that healing wouldn't be quick or easy. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But with every small breakthrough, I saw a glimpse of the man I once loved, not perfect, but willing to try. I also had to confront my own fears and insecurities, to stop walking on eggshells and start being honest about my needs and feelings. It wasn't about blame anymore, it was about rebuilding trust and connection. One evening, after a particularly honest conversation, he reached out and took my hand. No words were needed. The touch said everything. It was fragile, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But I knew the road ahead would still be long and uncertain. The cracks in our relationship were deep, and some might never fully heal. Yet, we had chosen to fight, to be vulnerable, and to face the unknown together. And in that choice, I found a new kind of love. Not the easy, fiery passion of before, but a quiet, determined commitment to try, no matter the outcome. After deciding to go to therapy, a fragile hope began to bloom between us. It wasn't the dramatic fairy tale kind of hope, but a quiet, trembling possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could heal the wounds that had grown so deep. Each session was like peeling back a layer of skin, sometimes painful, sometimes revealing, but always necessary. At first, it was difficult to sit across from a stranger and admit our failures. The therapist asked tough questions, made us confront the parts of ourselves we preferred to hide. He challenged us to be honest, not just about what was wrong with each other, but about what was wrong inside ourselves. It was uncomfortable but strangely liberating. He helped us learn new ways to communicate, to listen without judgment, to express without blame. Slowly, the sharp words and defensive walls began to soften. We discovered that beneath the frustration and hurt, there was still care and concern. But we also learned that love alone wasn't enough to fix everything. Outside the therapy room, life remained complicated. Work stress, family obligations, and personal struggles didn't pause for our healing. Some days we were patient and kind. Other days, old patterns returned. There were moments when the silence crept back in, when the distance felt insurmountable. I noticed small changes in him. A touch on my hand, a soft thank you, an attempt to share a thought. They felt like drops of light in a dark room. And I found myself trying to be more present, less anxious, more forgiving, both of him and myself. But hope was fragile. There were nights when I cried alone, scared that despite all our efforts, we might still drift apart. I feared losing not just him, but the future we had imagined together. The person I thought I knew seemed to be slipping away, replaced by someone I struggled to understand. One afternoon, after a difficult therapy session, he surprised me with a small gesture, my favorite flowers, and a note that said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." It was simple but powerful. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the man beneath the walls, the one still fighting. I realized that healing was not a destination, but a journey. We didn't need to have all the answers now. We only needed to keep trying, to keep showing up for each other. Yet, I also knew that part of this journey meant accepting uncertainty. There would be setbacks, disappointments, and pain. Love would be tested in ways I hadn't imagined. But as long as we held on to that fragile hope, we had a chance. The road we walked together was far from easy. Over the months and years, we had faced our darkest fears, confronted painful truths, and tried to hold on to something that kept slipping through our fingers. Therapy sessions brought some clarity, but also revealed cracks that were too deep to ignore. Standing at this crossroads, we both knew the decision ahead was not about who was right or wrong. It was about whether we still had a future together. I remember that evening vividly. The sky outside was painted with soft hues of orange and purple as the sun sank low. We sat across from each other in the living room, the silence heavier than words. For a while, we just held hands, drawing strength from the touch that had once been so comforting. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Whatever happens next, I want you to know I'm grateful. For you, for us, for everything you brought into my life." It felt like a gentle admission, an acknowledgement that even though things hadn't worked out as we hoped, the time together was precious and meaningful. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "Me too," I replied. "I wouldn't be who I am today without you." We spent that night talking, not about what went wrong, but about who we were, who we wanted to become, and the hope we still carried for our individual futures. We realized love isn't always about staying together forever. Sometimes it's about growing enough to let go, to allow each other the space to heal and find happiness apart. In the following days, the house felt emptier, but also quieter in a way that gave me room to breathe. I felt sorrow, of course, the kind that sinks deep into your bones. But there was also a sense of relief, a lightness that comes with acceptance. I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of our struggles. My passions, my laughter, my dreams. I wrote in my journal often, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I reflected on our journey, the laughter, the tears, the fights, and the moments of tenderness. I realized healing isn't a linear path. Some days were easier, others felt like falling backwards. But with each step, I grew stronger. The hardest part was learning to forgive him, and also to forgive myself. Forgive the mistakes, the misunderstandings, and the times we hurt each other unintentionally. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending it never happened. It meant freeing myself from carrying the burden of resentment, so I could move forward with an open heart. One afternoon, I packed away the last of his things, the reminders of our shared life. It was bittersweet but necessary. As I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel broken. I felt hopeful. Because even though our love story didn't have the perfect ending, it had shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. It taught me about vulnerability, patience, and the power of letting go. It showed me that sometimes the greatest love is the one that teaches you to love yourself first. Now, as I look toward the future, I carry our memories not as chains but as lessons. I am ready to open new chapters filled with growth, self-discovery, and the courage to embrace whatever comes next. And maybe, just maybe, that's the truest kind of love, one that doesn't cling desperately to what was, but instead nurtures the strength to walk forward with grace and hope.